You are listening to episode 20 of the Mom on Purpose podcast. Today, I'm talking with my friend Wendy about the biblical foundation for discipline. Welcome to Mom on Purpose podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for coming. The Mom on Purpose podcast is produced every week. Come back often and please subscribe in iTunes. All links and materials referenced are in the show notes, which you'll find at momonpurpose.com. Every Mom on Purpose episode begins with a quick mom verse designed to encourage you. Today's quick mom verse is 2 Chronicles 16:9. It says, "The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward Him." And this word blameless means whole, or it could mean sincere. It doesn't mean perfect. You shouldn't think perfect when you hear the word blameless, but you should think someone who has a sincere heart toward the Lord. And Mama, I want to encourage you today that if you have a sincere heart toward the Lord, He knows that about you. And He will give strong support. That's who He is, and that's how He is. He gives strong support to those whose hearts are blameless toward Him. So seek the Lord as you discipline your kids. Seek the Lord in how you should love them and give them affection. And when you feel weak, that is okay, because you have a God who says His eyes are running to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those who have a blameless heart toward Him. Hi, Mom on Purpose listeners. This is Jess, and I just wanted to give you a quick heads up that the conversation that Wendy and I are about to have about discipline is something that it's really important that you go back to the scriptures for yourself and check out the things that we're talking about. This is something that you need to be fully convinced about. Don't just take our word for it. The other thing I would warn you about is make sure that you're on the same page with your husband. It is far more important that you are unified with him than that you get every little detail exactly like we say or something. You and your husband need to be on the same page. So please take this next hour-long conversation as something that you can learn from, that is like a conversation that will help you think through discipline in your home. But do not take it as if our words are scripture. Be like the Bereans in Acts 17:11. Go back to scripture and see that what we're saying, where it lines up with scripture, and let those things be where your convictions rest. With that, let me get into part one of my conversation with Wendy. Hi, Wendy.
Hi.
Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your family.
Okay, so I just turned 44, and I have been married to my husband, Tim, for, 1994. It'll be 23 years this summer. Wow. We have 4 children. The oldest is 20 and is actually expecting her first. So I am going to be a grandma soon, which is really exciting. Yeah. And then I have 3 that are still living in the home. I have an 18-year-old daughter, a almost 15-year-old daughter. She'll be 15 in a couple weeks, and then a almost 13-year-old son. So I've been a parent for 20 years. It's amazing. Time just flies.
Yeah. I wanted listeners to particularly hear about your kids' ages because we're going to be talking through parenting. And so I wanted them to have some familiarity with the number of kids you have and how long you've been at this. So to get started, I want to read through Hebrews 12:5-11, because this is going to be the focus of our talk. And listeners, I just want you to pay attention to the wording. And Wendy and I are going to be having a conversation through these verses, kind of phrase by phrase. And so just listen to this passage, Hebrews 12:5-11. Have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by Him. For the Lord disciplines the one He loves and chastises every son whom He receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it.
That's good.
Yeah. The reason that I asked Wendy to come on and talk about this, there's two reasons. One is one day she mentioned to me how much she loved this passage. And it had, at that point when she said that, it had been something that the Lord had really been bringing to my mind a lot in terms of kind of providing us with a biblical foundation for thinking through discipline issues that arise with our kids. But the other thing is that Wendy has taught about these things for a number of years. And so I really wanted to bring her experience and insight to Mom on Purpose listeners. So, Wendy, I'm thankful that you agreed to do that because I think it's really going to benefit the moms out there. So I kind of just want to walk through this passage with you, just kind of phrase by phrase and verse by verse. So I thought first we could look at verses 5 through 8. And just tell me what you see there. Tell me what observations you have of this passage.
Okay, so can I just say something really quick first? Because as
Sure.
I've been looking at this week, I thought it was really interesting. And even before, like when we look at verse 3, it says, "Do not grow weary or faint-hearted." And then if you look at verse 12, there's again that it's just I just want to point out that it's bookended in like strengthening us. Okay. Yes. So then 12 is like, lift up your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out to you because not only for those who are receiving the discipline, but also for those who are disciplining is that there's this bookend of be strong in this. So what I see there is that, God's discipline is we're not supposed to regard it lightly. And so as I was kind of thinking this through, and being weary, what does that mean to, how does that relate to parenting? Well, first of all, we look at it in that, this is how we are to respond to God's discipline. But a lot of times there is this comparison of the relationship of a Christian and the Lord to the relationship of a child and the parent. So I think we can draw some parallels there.
Yeah.
So not taking it lightly and not being weary, I think we see this as the kids get a little bit older, where they can just feel like rolling their eyes or huffing or like mom's correcting me again, or, they can feel weary and they can want to take our discipline lightly. And so this is an encouragement that we can even bring our children to say, look at what God is saying here. Are you receiving my discipline lightly? Are you being weary when you're being reproved? Because I think the encouragement is similar. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it reminded me of the verse in Colossians. It says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged." And certainly, I think that's an issue where, of course, God always perfectly disciplines. And so he knows exactly what we need to have our spirit pause and even humbled so that we can receive the lesson he's trying to get through to our hearts. And we don't always have that level of insight to our kids. So I think there is that ability to for them to be weary. But I also think you're right. I think that they can regard it lightly. And I don't know about you, but I think that the foundation of early discipline can help, at least right now. I mean, my oldest is just 14, but I'm seeing this ability for him to stop, even in the midst of very difficult emotions or whatever, and realize that we mean things for his good.
Right.
And I think it goes back to that foundation of discipline. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That you don't just jump in at 15 and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Of course, we want to start as early as possible. My former pastor in a parenting class said that children are like wet cement. And the sooner they come, when they first come out of the chute, they're really moldable.
Yeah.
And the longer you wait to form it into the form that you want, the harder it's going to be.
Do you have more thoughts on verse 5, or we can move on to verse 6?
No, I think we can move on.
Okay. It says, "For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives." And then let's group this with 7. It says, 7 and 8, "It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons."
Yeah. So discipline is a mark of ownership.
Yeah.
And every good parent that loves their child is going to discipline them because they're seeing the benefit of that. Yeah. And like, we don't discipline other people's children generally.
That's right.
So if you're in a room with a parent and a child and you see some instruction from the adult to the child, you're going to make the connection that, oh, that's the parent of this child.
Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes we hear like, like people used to live in a village and the whole village would help support the parent. But right here in this context, which is almost 2,000 years ago that this is being written to the early church and to the Hebrews spread out all through the early church, we're seeing that actually there was still this, whatever the village did to support parents, there's still this very strong connection. And he's appealing to a natural logic that anyone can see, like fathers discipline their sons. And if you aren't disciplined, then you're not a real son.
Yes.
It's a really strong warning, I think, for us as parents that if you aren't going to do this, no one else will.
Yes, that is so true. Yeah, it's definitely, it's a privilege too, I can't tell you how often throughout my parenting time, I have just almost wept and thanked God for the privilege of being able to discipline and bring up children in his ways. Yeah. And not everyone has that privilege. Maybe you weren't a Christian when you were raising your kids, or maybe you came to the Lord later in life, or maybe you didn't, for whatever reason. It is a real honor and a privilege. And that's something that's really good to remind ourselves that God is giving us a chance to form these little souls, to love him and to be a light for him and to be productive members of society and to make a difference, Yeah. And then it's also a privilege. And this is like something that I feel like is really important that we really tried to do with our children from a very young age is our children need to understand that we discipline them because we love them. Yeah. This is an act of love. And we discipline them because God commands it. We need to show them in the Bible that we're not just doing this because we're mad at you or you're annoying us, but that we love you and mommy and daddy want to obey God and we want you to obey God. And so it's a privilege both to discipline and to be disciplined. And, I know there are kids who don't have any discipline. Maybe they're in the foster care system, or maybe their parents just aren't, in tune with that at all. And they crave that. They crave that structure. They crave those boundaries. And so, I think, it's a mark of ownership and it's a real privilege.
It's true. It's also something, this passage is one place in Scripture where a mother could share this with even a 3 or 4-year-old. If you read through the passage and then talked through the basic principles that God says fathers and mothers, parents are the ones to discipline their children. Yeah. And so this is right. This is something that God sees as good. And that's something that, I don't know about you, but I think a lot of moms struggle with is how can this thing that causes a disruption in emotions be a good thing? Yeah. I think this principle, God is treating you as sons, it's something good for us as moms to let it really sink down into our hearts so that we can discipline with confidence. Because when we are disciplining, we are treating our children rightly. This is not it's not a wrong thing. It's not a kind of like gray area. It's really clear from the Lord that this is a good thing.
And it's important to have a good view of, what is discipline, like what really is it, and how is it manifested? What does it look like? And we have to get those things right, or else it isn't godly discipline.
Yeah.
Then it's just, getting revenge or acting out or letting you push buttons until I'm explosive. And so you're getting some sinful. And so I think it's really important that we define discipline as, coming from a place of love, given with self-control, given with instruction, that the child understands, what they've done, that they're not just turned around and popped in the mouth.
Right.
So, godly discipline it's very specific, what it is. So
that's good. And verse 9 talks a little bit, or it at least leads into what you're talking about. It says, besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. And then he appeals, shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? But point being, there is a connection between discipline and respect. And if our discipline is done in a way that leads to a lack of respect from our children, then we're not doing it correctly.
Yes, that for sure is a red flag, that something's not right. And that doesn't mean, I was thinking about this earlier, that doesn't mean that just because you have one, disrespectful act from your child that you're doing something wrong. Definitely we're going to get that.
For sure.
We're going to get, but when you step back and you look, is my child characterized by disrespect towards me, then there's probably something really wrong.
Yes.
And something that needs to change. For sure.
Yeah. And I guess I should clarify, you and I probably both are approaching that from a perspective of older children. Younger children, initially, the 2, 3, 4-year-old, they may not be very respectful, right, as you're disciplining.
Right.
It's not going to look like, thank you, Mom. Right. But like you're saying, over the long haul, is the way that we're interacting, commanding their respect, or bringing about something different, like disgust.
Yeah.
Because we're so out of control or whatever. Right.
Or hypocritical. Yeah. Or we say one thing and then we do something else. Yeah. I think it's almost easier when they're younger to earn their respect. Yes. It's just like, don't touch that, and a little spank on the hand. Yes. And it's like the child's eyes get big and they look at you and they learn pretty quick, Yeah. And so I feel, to be honest, and I hate to say this to younger moms, because when your kids are young and they're waking up in the middle of the night and you're, cleaning up throw up and poop and all that stuff, you can just feel like so weary, like, oh my goodness, this is going to get any better. Yeah. But, so I hate saying this, but it's really harder the older they get. It just is so much harder. And so that can also be an encouragement to us that, lay the foundation when they're young, form the cement when it's wet and pliable. Yeah. Or otherwise you're going to have to bring out a jackhammer, and that's not easy work. It's not impossible, but it's not easy work.
Well, so and it's not always effective. We've both seen, I'm sure, relationships where the parent brings out the jackhammer at 15, 16, 19, and relationships are broken at that point. Sometimes. Yeah. The Lord is merciful. And if you have disciplined your child poorly, and maybe you weren't a believer, or maybe you were a very, very poorly discipled believer, and then at 13, you go, oh my goodness, we have got to start. Yeah. I think actually this passage could be a big help. Don't you think that you could bring this to an older child and say, let's talk through this.
Yep. Yes.
And even confess your sin, that, this is a role that I have not been fulfilling.
Yes. Yes. And I just think that is so key. And, when you're coming in later in the game, and even when you're not coming in later in the game, just that honesty and that humility, I think the one thing that drives children away from their parents, the wedge that separates a child and a parent's heart, is hypocrisy. It's dishonesty and it's hypocrisy. And so, there's times where I have to, it's probably daily that I have to go to my kids and say, you know what, I'm sorry that, I didn't respond to your sin in the right way, or I responded to your sin with my sin, or I'm sorry that I got angry, or I raised my voice, or I said that thing. and then just being honest, like, you know what, this is hard for mom. And, for that person that's coming in later, you know what, mom didn't know. And we know now, and this is how things are going to look. Explain what the game plan's going to look like. Explain. And you know what? It's not a jackhammer so much as maybe like a chisel or a shaving tool where you're going to, you guys are working together. And so when there's a drastic change like that, go slow and give a game plan of what it might look like and what they can expect. And you're both going to make mistakes. Both the parents and the child are going to make mistakes. But I think it's just that honesty that really knits the child's heart and helps them to trust you. Like when we admit our faults and our mistakes, it helps them to see us as, well, mom's just not this dictator or this authoritarian. She is a sister in the Lord who is walking the same journey as I am. She has the same sins to overcome. She needs the same Savior.
Yes. And
those things are really important.
Yeah. And when you have a 2-year-old, it's very easy to feel like I am the adult. He is a little, to feel that way, to feel like he is so small. He is so much lesser than I. Yeah. And the older my kids have gotten, the more I feel like, man, I am only a matter of steps ahead of them on this road.
Oh, yes. It's very humbling for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So verse 10, it says, "For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness." Thoughts about this verse?
This is a short time, and having a 20-year-old who's expecting her own just reminds me that it goes by so fast. And so, again, going back to the being weary, just reminding ourselves this is a short time. I have a sister who's 10 years younger than I am, and she has 4 children, and I think her oldest is 8. And I regularly text her, and I just say, it's going to be over soon,
Yeah.
I just to remind her that, it's your sleeves are rolled up and you're in the thick of things right now, but it's going to pass by, and the discipline is for our good, both God's discipline to us and ours to our children. And again, there's something that we can explain to our 2-year-old, our 3-year-old, honey, mama loves you. Mama gave you a spanking when you did that thing because I love you. And I don't want you to learn that is the right thing. Yeah. And when you obey mama, you're also obeying God. And I think that's really important. Not that we have to be careful that we're not asking our children to do anything that God wouldn't want them to do. But I think within the confines of expecting obedience and good behavior from our children, we can help them understand that one of the ways, their primary way of obeying Jesus as God commands them, when you look at in the Bible, what does God say to children? He says, obey your parents. Yeah. That's the one thing that he tells them. Yeah. And so just reminding them that this is God's almost number one job outside of loving him is for you to obey mommy. Yeah. And that is for their good. It's not because, and I have to remind my kids this even today, I have to say, you know what, sweetheart, I'm not bringing this to your attention because I want to be a damper on your party. Like I had to talk to one of my kids the other day about spending money. And I said, why do you think, because the attitude wasn't the best, and I said, why do you think I want to talk to you about how you're spending your money? Do you think it's because, I want to control you, or I just don't want you to have fun and go out and buy the things you want? Or do you think it's because I want good for you? I want to teach you and train you so that when you're not under our authority anymore and you're out in the world, you have some principles to help guide you. Yeah. So I think just like that's like one of my primary jobs is to keep reminding my children, we discipline for your good.
That's really good. The other thing that I've taken heart from this passage is that phrase, as it seemed best to them. There's an acknowledgement here that parents are human. And I love it because we do feel that. Like some parents think, oh, I'm going to try this timeout thing and see if it works. And that trial and error sometimes and trial and maybe for some kids it could work, but trying certain things is something that is covered by this verse, that we are not going to do everything exactly perfectly. And God knows that. He's acknowledging it here in this verse that our discipline is for a short time, and it's as it seemed best to them. And so we're doing the best we can. We're searching out what God's best is for each of our kids. And sometimes that can even, shift from child to child, where one child might need a longer time of spanking, talking through, processing through the situation. And some kids, it's like a shorter spanking and a very quick word, and they are like quick to respond,
Yeah. Knowing your kids, and then also just, if you're at the very beginning of your family, your kids are really young, I think just understanding that each child really is unique and different is really helpful, and that it's not all going to be cookie cutter.
Yeah.
And I think as parents, like a lot of times we just kind of go into that mode, like we do what we know, and we'll see pretty quickly that each one is different. I have one who it just takes, a word, and he's immediately like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mommy. I didn't, please forgive me." And then there was other ones who, it just like, I still am like, "Lord, are you going to do the work in this child?" So each child is really, unique and different. And that's really helpful, to know. And then I think, just going back to as it seems best to them. So then the question comes up, like, this doesn't seem best, like maybe there's something like I feel like God's commanded, but it doesn't seem best. Like they're not responding to it, or they're getting more angry, or, when I spank my 3-year-old over the diaper, he's getting mad at me and pulling my hair, or, and so I really like, for me, one of the most beneficial things was I had a mentor, and she's about 10 years older than I am. And I really trusted her, and I trusted her parenting, and she was just someone I could call and say, "Hey, we're having this problem with our son." Like I remember, my youngest would not take a spanking when he was younger, and he would fight and kick, and it took 2 of us to kind of hold him down and just to give him his spanking. And it just didn't feel good to me. It didn't feel right. And I just felt like, this is not good. How do we fix this? And so she was someone that I regularly called, and she just always had some other angle or some other idea or some other thing that we could try. And it was really, really helpful just to have someone that you could trust. And so if something feels like it doesn't seem best to you, get some advice from somebody that you trust that's older, and just say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And maybe it's not best. Maybe what you're doing is exasperating. Maybe it's, spanking over a diaper, which is something I do not recommend ever. Maybe that is just making them mad, and so you might not be able to figure that out on your own. You might need someone else to say, "Hey, you know what? That might not be the best way to go about that." So I always just really appreciated just having a couple women in my life that I could just call, and that I knew had gone before and would have some good insight for me.
Yeah. And on that point, it brings up a principle that I've thought through a lot over the years, which is, and you mentioned it, but I want to highlight it. Ask someone who has done well in this area. Don't commiserate with other moms who have the exact same age kids as you, who also are struggling and don't really know what they're doing. Ask someone who is further along. Ask someone who you look at their kids and you go, "Man, they are respectful. They are what this passage is describing. They still have a relationship. They respect their parents. I can see that discipline has been for their good." Ask that mom and dad what they've done.
Yeah. And you have to be intentional about that. That's not usually something that happens at the park or happens in your mom's group.
Right.
And I think that's kind of like something that worries me as an older mom a little bit today when I look at the younger generation. I don't see a lot of that, and maybe I'm just not seeing it in the circles that I'm in, but I would be so happy to see younger moms being more intentional about developing a relationship with an older mom, even if it's just like once a month phone calls, or, you're too busy, but just get on the phone or just email each other, whatever you need to do, because there really is wisdom in experience, and I remember when I was younger, like I remember this one mom who was about 15 years older than me, and I just said, "What are the top three things you would want to tell a younger mom looking back at your parenting?" Or, just at a church potluck or something, find someone who's older and just say,
Yes.
hey, what have you learned about parenting? And maybe they won't be able to tell you what they did right. Maybe they'll say, you know what, this is one thing I wish I would have done differently.
Yes.
And that's really valuable too.
Yeah.
You know, so,
And
yeah,
even,
I mean,
if there's something that a parent does right in a particular area, they may not do everything right, but maybe you notice that their kids don't have a lot of rivalry and they seem to get along and be pleasant with one another. Ask about that. Ask how they develop their kids' relationships with one another. Find the area that they're strong and learn from them. That's good.
Yeah. And that's something you can do with anyone of any age. I mean, if you see a parent that's got, she's the mom of a 3-year-old and her 3-year-old is doing some things really great, then see what they're doing, learn from them for sure.
Yeah. That's really good.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure I was clear about was, it's funny because over my years as a parent, I've observed other families and other children. And, there's certain personality types where I remember we babysit our pastor's son this one time, and he was like 2 or 3. And my kids were also young at the time, but I remember like putting him on the couch and giving him a book. And like he stayed on the couch, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's so." I was like, I didn't know there was children like this, And so, I just wanted to say that there's definitely personality types, and so when I give my testimony of my parenting, my children were not the ones that would stay anywhere for more than 30 seconds. They were not the ones who, just came out of the womb saying, I want to obey mom. In fact, we have this funny story that we tell about my 15-year-old, almost 15. And, she laughs about it and, we talk about it a lot. But when she was 3, I think she was 2 or 3, she must have been 3. She was, maybe towards 4. Anyway, she was loading up the dishwasher, and I was kind of just putzing around the kitchen, and she starts to sing this song. And I just like listening to her, and she's like, I don't love God. I don't want to obey my parents. And she's just like, oh my goodness, like what are you singing? And she's also the one that at 7 months I journaled I had like this mom's journal that said that we could tell that she was really strong-willed. So I just wanted to, give a testimony that my children they're not those, kids that you put on the couch and sit, they sit there for 30 minutes. They were really, it was a lot of work, and they really pushed back at so anyway, it can be done. There is hope.
Yes. Yeah. And so for me too, that's the other thing that you were kind of talking about is processing through discipline so that in the moment we're not leaving it with them just angry at the end of it.
Oh yeah.
But actually processing through to the point where they can receive it.
Yes. Yeah. And I used my husband a lot for that. When my husband was home, he was the disciplinarian, and he just did such a great job. I mean, I did have this result too, but he just did it so much better than me, and he still does, because he's a lot more patient of just really helping them to understand. And when they were younger, the kids would come out with a happy smile, and he'd be in there for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, and he'd have these long conversations. And so it wasn't just like, you turn around and get popped. It was like, go in my room and, they're going to get their spank, but then I love you. Let's talk about this. Let's pray about this. How's your heart? Do you know that you're loved? Do you, are we okay? Is there repentance? Is there restoration in the relationship? Those things are super important.
Yeah. I think I'm probably more like what you're describing with Tim, but it's much shorter for me because I don't have time to do that long of a session.
And that wasn't every time.
But I do think that it is important to process through it and come out with, like we're unified versus we're still at odds. If we're still at odds, then the discipline actually hasn't produced the full effect. We haven't gone through the full process of discipline if at the end of it, we're still at odds with one another.
Right. And in the throes of life, that's not always something that a mom's going to be able to do, which is why my husband always did it, much better than I. And I'm not saying everyone has to do that every time. That was just his way.
Yeah.
But, there's going to be times where you're in the middle of life and it's not necessary because they get the spanking and they're okay right away, immediately.
Right.
And then there's going to be other times where you can't deal with it because you've got, the kitchen's on fire. So the dad can help when he gets home, or you can deal with it later. But for sure.
Well, and then verse 11. So now we're kind of to one of the central parts. And I think we're going to slow down and really look at this phrase by phrase, because I feel like this verse is one of the keys that if you are struggling out there, Mom, with understanding this relationship between pain and discipline, why is pain ever a good thing? This verse is one of the best ways to understand it. So really, let's slow down and think about it. Verse 11 says, "For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." So, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, pain is something, it's a gift that God's given us to tell us something's not right here. It tells us, don't go further here, right? When you touch something that's hot, what's your immediate response? To pull back.
Pull back.
Plan B.
Yeah.
Definitely pain is a gift. And I've been thinking about that a lot this week. And I'm actually an RN as well, and I spent some time working in the emergency room. And one of the things that we saw quite a bit was people that came in with diabetic ulcers, or a necrotic foot, or some kind of, and it usually was on the feet because it was kind of had the least sensitivity to pain over time. What happens with diabetes is you lose nerve sensation. And so there's even special socks that people with diabetics have to wear and stuff because they lose nerve function, and they lose the ability to feel pain. And so what would happen is they would get like a little cut or something in their foot, and because they couldn't feel that they had this cut, it would get infected, and then they would get this necrosis, and eventually they'd end up losing their foot. And so that pain, which God gives to tell us that something is wrong, wasn't there. And so there was really serious consequences of that. So pain, nobody likes pain. And in fact, when we have to inflict pain on our little sweet baby, that we have nursed at the breast and just is the most wonderful thing ever, it's not easy, but we have to understand, we have to step back and look at the long term of, we can have a little pain now, both me and my child, or we can have a huge amount of pain later. And, the Bible reinforces that. And I think about that one. There's Proverbs 29:17, which says, "Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart." And so that, that's kind of like, do it now, and later you're going to get this rest and this delight. And then 19:18 says, "Discipline your son, for there is hope, and do not set your heart on putting him to death." And so again, there's this, do this, or else, you might have this result later that you're actually going to bring about his death because you didn't do your job. If you don't train a child to listen to your voice and they're running into the street and you say, no, and they don't know, they haven't been trained that when mom says no, I stop and I turn around and I go towards mom. You know what I mean? Like that could have really dire consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's easy, I think, for the mom who is not adamantly opposed to, say, spanking or using some form of pain as discipline. It's easy to see the connection between, running into the street. Of course, that's something that, if you're going to spank, that's a reason to do it, right? But it's worthwhile teasing out what actually, that produces death, but when I'm looking at a 2-year-old who's having an absolutely stubborn posture, or a 3-year-old who is using emotions to try to get his way, or a 4-year-old who is arguing back at every step, when we project that same behavior forward 20, 25 years, it turns into someone who is in jail and has actually lost life. It may not be the same physical death that would happen from running into the street, but there is death ahead if we project whatever behavior we're seeing that is undesirable when we project it forward 20, 30, 40 years, there's death. There might be death of relationships. If that little girl grows up to be a wife who argues at every point with her husband, there's death of relationship ahead for her.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that there that word trained in verse 11, for those who have been trained by it, we're starting young. We're starting when they're two, that when mama says no, you stop. Or when mama calls your name, you say, yes, mama, and you come to me. That's that training of where you're not going to have that in 20 years. You know, if you start when they're young and you start building upon that, of them trusting your voice. You know, I think of that verse where Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice and they know my voice. Do our children hear our voice? Do they know our voice? Do they respond to our voice? You know, or do they just ignore it? And somebody really helpful to me gave me that little idea. When my kids were young, they said, add 10 years, you know, or 20 years to whatever that behavior is. So when you're a 5-year-old, you know, when you tell them no and they say no back to you and spit in your face or hit you in the face, is that the kind of behavior you want to see when they're 15? You know? So that's really helpful, because I think we can get like so in the moment, like, why does it really matter? He's 2. You know? But it does, because that word train in verse 11 is actually, you know, I did a little word study, and it's actually the word that we get gymnasium from. It's gymnazo, and it means to exercise. And I mean, it's got a really good meaning of just building upon this, you know, it says, let me just define it really quick. It's funny because it says to exercise naked, and the idea behind that is that you're removing all the hindrances. And so it's like naked or in a loincloth. So all the hindrances are removed. I mean, you are serious about this kind of training. You're not going to have a big puffy jacket on. You're going to get the right equipment on so that you can train. And it's to train with one's full effort to complete physical, emotional force, like when working out intensely in a gymnasium. It conveys acquiring proficiency through practice, regular exercise with graduated resistance. So that means it's like, I'm going to start here and we're going to build upon this. We're going to start with the 2-year-old saying, yes, mama, when I called her. And then we're going to move, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's building upon, it's something that we build upon.
And that's such a great picture, because, of course, the athlete that works out, he's actually ripping his muscles. Like we talk about getting ripped, but actually you are tearing muscle fibers when you do work that's beyond what your current capability is. And then that's why it takes a couple of days to reform and get stronger, basically. And so we're essentially in discipline, but it's building up those muscles. And I see that with my older kids, where the things that we've done before make it so much easier. Once they start hitting, say, the puberty years where hormones are in full rage, or where the situations start becoming more complex, wanting to hang out with this friend, but you know this other friend is going to be there, and you're concerned about what's going to be talked about, or all the things that you face in the older years, those early the muscle building sessions of thinking through discipline together, and them learning to submit themselves to parents.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, the rest of that verse, that it yields a peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. You know, I have a 20-year-old, and she was helping take care of this little girl who didn't have any discipline. The mom was a single mom and working, and just, you know, she would call me and just tell me kind of how her days went, and just even seeing like her being able to implement that in another child's life. Like I mean, God's ways are just the best. And I think when we do have that 2-year-old and that 4-year-old and we're like doubting, we just need to confess that to the Lord. Like, Lord, I'm having a hard time embracing your promise here. Help me to believe that obeying you in this area is going to yield the peaceful fruit of righteousness. You know, if I'm willing to be trained and to train my child, I just, you know, if you sat down and talked with any of my kids, they would definitely support the way that they were raised, and they will definitely say that they would like to also raise their children that way. And it's not that we were perfect. But I mean, I see that fruit. I have a daughter. She's a believer. She's married. She is married to a husband. My daughter is very, very strong. First of all, I'll say that. And she's married to someone who's really strong with really strong opinions. And it's just been like almost brings me to tears to see what a great job she's doing at submitting to him. And, in ways that, I mean, it's better than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Because I did tell her when she was little, like, if you can't submit to me, how are you going to submit to your husband? I think that's a really good thing to project forward is what will this look like in a marriage? That's something I did a lot with my kids.
Well, and with sons, from my perspective, we have, 7 boys. For us, what that sounds like is if you can't submit to us, how are you going to submit to an employer? How are you going to submit to a judge when he says something has to happen with your company or something and you disagree? The way to learn to submit to authorities, whoever they are, is right now. This is the season that God has ordained. And even though it's painful, God means for this pain now to prevent later pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you're having doubts and you're having struggles, reach out, get help. There's times where we just need someone just to encourage us, because again, like those scriptures were bookend in don't be weary. And there's times where we are weary and we just do need to talk to someone who's not in the eye of the hurricane and have them tell us, you know what, it's going to be okay, and trust God and just move forward and do what he's asking us to do, and to know that, it does tend to work out. And, I've still got kids in the home, so I don't want to claim that I've had victory, but, God is faithful. He's faithful, and he does that work in our children and our believing children. And, I've definitely just seen that in my kids, and just seen, it surprises me sometimes, because I think maybe the parent is one of the hardest authorities to submit to. Yeah. Because, when you are, so all that to say that if we can make that relationship work and instill that in them, they will do really a lot better under an employer, and better than they're doing in the home, because there's other elements at work like pay and, wanting to be recognized and different things. Yes. And that there's, so, again, if we're faithful to do that in the home, God is going to multiply the fruit there. And I've definitely seen that in my older kids.
Yeah. I wanted to, one last thought before we kind of wrap up our discussion of the passage. The phrase, all discipline seems painful, that has been really helpful for me for clarifying what is discipline. Because sometimes moms will come and they're like, I put her in timeout and she just laughs at me. And I'm like, that's because it's not painful to her. And this passage says all discipline seems painful. And so for me, a good indicator has been what will be painful to this child. It's not enough. Like if for example, one other common issue that I've seen is moms who have a little girl first. And she just required one spanking, and then she was good or whatever, or maybe she needed 3. But then they have a little boy and they're like, he laughs at me. And I'm like, that's because he has a higher pain tolerance, and he does not think it hurts. And so you need to test it on your leg and see how your spanking feels, because I'm pretty sure that what you're thinking of as a spanking is more like a little clap to him, and he barely feels it. And so you need to test it on your leg and see, what does my spanking actually feel like? Is it painful?
Yes. And I think when we can give a painful spanking, we don't have to spank as much. So it's like, if you're doing something that's ineffective, you might be repeatedly doing that thing. But when you do something effective, you're done. Yes. So the big difference between, what I've seen successful spankings and unsuccessful spankings is it needs to cause, pain. Yeah. And then it's, honestly, we spanked our kids. It was one spank, and it wasn't a ton, because that was enough to get them hopping, ouch. And so that's really important. Yeah. It does have to be something that's painful. Yes. And for each child, that's going to be different, and we need to understand understand that. Yeah. And as they get older, again, that gets trickier of how are we going to inflict pain upon this child? Like, how are we going to take something away, or like, and when you raise kids who kind of are really flexible, that gets right. It gets really tricky to try to figure out how can I make something painful in your life,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I was sitting here thinking, you and I, if a mom was listening, she might think, why are they laughing about this? This seems really because I know when I first started spanking, it seemed so
Yes.
It seemed so hard, and it broke my heart that this sweet son that I really thought of as very close to perfect, like I just thought of him so preciously. And and then he reaches up and hauls off and says no, and hits me in the face in the middle of a store, and I'm like, and I called my mentor, and I'm like, I think this is the time when I need to spank him, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
And so I remember that fullness of emotion. But one of the fruits for me as a parent of consistently disciplining and working through these things, pressing through the difficulty of it, has been that now it is not a question in my mind. Now I am able to submit myself to Scripture and see, man, discipline is good. Discipline is good. And I can embrace it and not be scared of it anymore, not wonder if I'm doing the right thing. And you've shared that too, that you, in fact, you actually commented on something. Oh, I love discipline. I love this because of what it produces.
Yes. It is a gift. It truly is a gift. And yeah, I mean, I totally understand that. And when you're a new parent, it's like, everything's kind of like you're stepping in. Is this going to be sure footing that I'm putting my foot out on? And I mean, sin is sad, and it should make us grieve and mourn. And the fact that we've produced this beautiful little child, and yet they're conceived in sin, that they have this same sin nature that we have.
Yes.
That is sad, and so that's where our grief should lie, that there is sin, and that my child is going to struggle with sin their entire life.
Yes.
And what a great opportunity for them later to see that they're going to need a savior.
Yes.
So, I mean, I understand that too. And, but it is, I mean, I'm so grateful for the blessing of discipline, because I remember when my kids were younger, and, there would be something off about them. Like they'd be 3 or 4, and we just, we couldn't really put a finger on what the direct disobedience was, but they just were in a funk, we just couldn't, like they weren't doing well. And then I remember just kind of waiting for something to happen that we could identify, some disrespect or something, and then them having to get a spank. And then like for 3 days, we'd have this new child.
Yes.
There's times when it's a reset, like they need that. Okay, I'm not in charge. There's someone who's smarter than me and more mature than me and bigger than me in charge. And that's really comforting. And I need to be reminded of that at 2 years old and 3 years old and 4 years old. And so that almost gives them this sense of peace, like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, you project that same thing forward. It's like someone who's working in an office, and they kind of take a company pen and they stick it in their pocket and they take it home. And then they take company notebooks and they think, oh, I need to use one for my presentation at church this week. I'll just grab one of these. And they don't realize that what they're actually doing is petty theft. And until they get written up by a supervisor, there's not the sting of pain.
Yes.
But they have been doing minor things wrong all along. And actually the sting of pain is a real gift. That helps them see, oh, all of this has been wrong.
Yes. Yep. And we still need that sometimes, even at age 44.
Yeah. Jess here again. Wow. Hebrews 12 is such a gift to us as parents. I think sometimes we can get the wrong impression that the only place in the Bible that talks about discipline is just Proverbs, and maybe that's just, not really talking about real discipline. But the truth is that the Bible gives a very clear picture that discipline is meant for good, and that discipline and pain are connected. So I have loved this episode. I know it's been longer than normal, but I hope it's been fruitful for you and encouraging in your journey of motherhood. Come back next week for episode 21, where Wendy and I will continue this conversation, talking more about the practical ramifications of discipline and the benefits that she and I have both seen in our lives, in our homes, and with our kids. Thanks for listening to the Mom on Purpose podcast. For more information and all links and show notes, go to momonpurpose.com. You can make a huge difference in how many women find and benefit from this podcast. Please like Mom on Purpose on iTunes and take 2 minutes to leave a review. I'll meet you again next time to equip you to be a mom on purpose.